Lawsuit is a disaster. I don't know what this is about. I didn't even know they had a
Whoa.
lawsuit.
Well, I guess the streaming wars are in the midst of crowning a winner. So if you've watched any of my South Park discussions over the past 2 years, you've probably heard me mention the ongoing lawsuit between Warner Brothers and Paramount over the streaming rights to South Park, after Warner Brothers won the rights to stream new episodes of the series on HBO Max for $500 million. Shortly before, creators Matt Stone and Trey Parker signed a $900 million deal with Paramount to produce 14 South Park special events to stream exclusively on their new service, Paramount Plus. Safe to say Warner Brothers weren't too happy about that. Well, there's been a ton of back and forth over this the past few years. At the end of 2023, the court sided with Paramount after claiming that Warner Brothers didn't provide enough evidence to show this move was pure deception. But they pushed forward and it seems to have paid off, as the courts have just now sided with them, which now allows the case to go to trial, in a lawsuit that has taken so long to finish that ironically Warner Brothers' rights to stream South Park ends this year. They really got the short end of the stick with all this. But with that, Paramount could be expected to pay a hefty sum, as Warner claim it's taken away valuable subscribers who instead took their business to Paramount Plus to watch the special events, as the amount of new South Park episodes released since the deal went through has greatly decreased. See, Warner paid so much for South Park under the assumption they would be receiving 10 new episodes a year, given that's what the studio had been consistently releasing previously. However, after the duo signed their deal with Paramount Plus, it meant they now had to release an extra hour and a half worth of South Park episodes every year until 2027. Oh my god, that's so soon. Because of all this, Matt and Trey, understandably stretched a tad thin with all this new South Park, along with the reopening of Casa Bonita, and along with their new Kendrick Lamar movie that's real, just decided, hey, what if we just take our 10 episode season we gotta produce this year, cut off an hour and a half worth of episodes, and make those the special events? And no one will ever know. Maybe you guys shouldn't have made a whole two-parter making fun of Warner Brothers for wasting their money on this.
So if you make an exclusive deal with a streaming service, you can't make an exclusive deal with another streaming service, can you?
Also, you may have noticed, given we are reaching the end of that contract, but we never ended up getting those 2 special events per year, did we? Don't get me wrong, things started strong with a consistent release. But as of recent, South Park has gone quiet altogether. There weren't any new episodes throughout the entirety of 2024. All we did end up receiving was a single special that is almost a year old at this point. Along with that crappy snow game, I guess? Now, this is not to imply that Matt and Trey have gotten lazy with South Park, not at all. I imagine they would be releasing the episodes if it weren't for all this. As with the trial going on longer and longer, it being way more up in the air as to who's gonna win, I'm sure they're just sat there asking the most reasonable question. Where do we release this stuff to? Do they just play ignorant? Continue releasing episodes to Warner and specials to Paramount? Or would that just dig the hole even further? You know, no matter what, you can't deem it as being unreasonable for Warner to have expected a total of 40 new South Park episodes to have hit HBO Max by now, given the whole 10-a-year shtick they had been doing at the time the contract was signed. You want to know how many they've gotten out so far out of the expected 40? 12. Like, how did they not anticipate them getting pissed at this? $500 million, by the way! I can only assume that's why we haven't seen any specials in almost a year. Paramount probably told them to hold off on it out of fear of making the situation worse for themselves. As if this case goes to trial, they are going to be expected to release a ton of analytics, which I'll be delving into later in the video. Subscribe, by the way. Alright, to get this out of the way now before going further into this, I am not a lawyer. Anything I'm saying is just the opinion of some random guy on the internet. I hope that works. Okay, sweet. So, like, Paramount's gonna lose this, right? We can all agree on that? You know, to drop all the who's gonna win stuff. Let's be real. Paramount knew what they were doing and undoubtedly used this whole special event shit to try and make the best out of giving away South Park's streaming rights. That's understandable to be upset about, especially when your own newly launched streaming service has been floundering so badly and could desperately use a show like South Park to bump up subscriber numbers. But at the end of the day, that's kind of on Viacom for not having the foresight to want to keep the show in case they wanted to use it for their own service. At that point, the rational move would have been to let Matt and Trey continue making episodes for HBO Max and then move it all to Paramount Plus in 2025. That's sort of the situation you've put yourself in, you know, you accepted $500 million for it. It was obvious from the start to anyone paying attention why they struck this special event deal, and it wasn't to give the fans a series of high-quality South Park movies to enjoy. It was purely to boost the subscriber count to Paramount Plus, which sucked for casual South Park fans who couldn't keep up with what was happening. I'm sure all they knew was that sometimes they'd get a couple episodes on
Mhm.
Two streaming services, if you want to do is plead ignorance. We didn't know our special events infringed on any prior agreement. May not be a good enough excuse in the court's eyes, which will only be made more apparent once the analytics come out. See, Paramount have been desperately trying to keep this from going to court, and I have to assume it's because it would require them to be investigated to analyze how much that benefited from these South Park movies. Like, if the judge receives an analysis that details Paramount Plus not gaining a significant increase in subscribers after the release of these South Park special events, then Warner Brothers can't really claim damages on this. Paramount had nothing to gain. Realistically, though, I doubt that's the case. I have to assume said analytics show a trend that actively works in Warner's favor, which is probably why Paramount are trying so hard to make sure the case is dropped. Like, let's be real, who the fuck has a Paramount Plus subscription? I don't, thought you do. I just borrow a friend's and that's only to watch South Park. And I can't imagine I'm alone on that, unless you pirate it or something, that works too. Viacom are in a lose-lose situation. They can either admit defeat, say that they knowingly used a loophole to get around their contract with Warner, and pay a hefty fine as a result, or they can continue to plead ignorance, in which they'll be looked into and it'll be made clear definitively that they profited from this, in which they pay a fine. Either way, it leads to one conclusion. No more South Park special events on Paramount Plus. Which, to be fair, wouldn't be the end of the world in my opinion. Honestly, I think some of these TV movies stretch out a simple concept for way too long to warrant the added runtime, and could have been just as strong, if not stronger, as regular episodes. But still, as of now, it's stuck the series in limbo. They're probably too afraid to do anything with it until things die down and it's made clear what the result of this case will be. Knowing my luck, cut to them a week later announcing a new special. But really, what do I see happening to South Park because of this? Well, could be one of three things. 1. They pay a fine and continue making them. This is the outcome I think is least likely, that Paramount will be forced to pay Warner for this clear breach in contract, then continue releasing the special events they already agreed to make. Main reason I can't see this happening is because it would mean Paramount is continuing to breach their contract by producing more. However, maybe in whatever deal comes out of this, part of the fine they pay can be to continue releasing them on their platform, but even then, I can't imagine Warner would want to be that favorable. Again, they got fucked out of 28 South Park episodes that were never produced because of all this. Like, if we were to assume a fan of South Park would have watched all 28 of those episodes on Max, then that's over 10 hours of watch time per person that would have been guaranteed spent on their streaming service. In this era where watch time is everything, I can't imagine Warner Brothers are taking that lightly, so I don't see this one happening. 2. South Park will begin to release the remainder of their specials to HBO Max. The contract that Matt and Trey signed mentions creating specials specifically for Paramount Plus, so if they were forced to stop, I'm curious if the ones already produced on top of the remaining 7 will just get dumped onto Max, or if they'll just get cancelled outright. If so, then wow, what a colossal waste of money on Viacom's part. I can't imagine the two of them were paid all of that $900 million up front. More than likely, each special came with its own price tag, and so they were being paid as they got made. But then I have to wonder how Matt and Trey would react to the news that they aren't getting paid a large amount of money that they already agreed to accept. Those restaurant renovations don't pay for themselves. I could see this outcome happening, but there's one final result of all this that I think is most likely. 3. The remaining special events will be cancelled, if not put on hold. I could easily see either of these happening because of all this. Paramount quietly cancels the final 7 South Park specials and hope they can put this whole ordeal behind them. If not, like I said before, Warner's contract expires this year. Who's to say Paramount aren't just waiting until then so they can start them back up? Finish out the specials knowing there's no chance of pissing off any other companies, since they'll once again be within their right to do so. The only thing I think could come in the way of that is, well, they only made this agreement to get around the fact that new episodes were being put on a rival streaming service. If there's no longer a rival getting the regular South Park episodes, then why not just go back to making regular South Park episodes? What's to say they don't just get Matt and Trey to go back to the 10-episode-a-season format that was working just fine for years? At the time, the news of these 14 South Park movies was exciting, but honestly, in retrospect, it's made following along with the show a mess. I'm ready for them to go back to what worked before, and no longer being forced into coming up with 2 ideas per year which they think can be stretched out to 45 minutes. But no matter which of these 3 outcomes happen, I think at the end of the day we can all agree, what a glorious waste of time. I mean, like I've been saying, Warner's exclusivity runs out this year. The entire show will be going back to Paramount Plus until they inevitably go out of business and it goes back to bidding out their shows to another streaming service again, and which I can only assume Warner Brothers will stay extremely clear from. In retrospect, it all comes off so short-sighted on Viacom's part, not only selling the streaming rights shortly before the launch of their own service, but also in just not admitting they fucked up and waiting for their rights to go back to them. They could have avoided this entire mess and it would have been over by now. Because really, it doesn't seem like they benefited all too much from this. Sure, people undoubtedly subscribe to Paramount Plus to watch the new South Park specials, but you can't maintain an entire streaming service based on one single show. You spent almost $1 billion on this because you couldn't just wait 5 years? I think it's seriously tarnished South Park's viewership. You know, the show will always be successful, I don't think there's any fighting that, but once the pitiful 6-episode season started to become the norm, you could really see a drop-off in terms of interest and discussion around the show, when it came to these singular episodes at least. I think giving viewers 2 movies a year just put all the discussion onto those, since they're obviously going to come off as more enticing, causing the short seasons to be almost forgotten in a way. Like, what's a South Park episode from the past 3 years you could consider memorable, that goes in your top 10 or even 20 of all time? I could barely even describe what happens in half of them, because the only thing that would end up sticking with me throughout the year was whatever 2 movies they pumped out. Which, to be fair, sometimes were pretty good. But whenever they failed to hit the mark, you could really tell the gap between episodes. You know, if a bad episode comes out in a season, you know, whatever, I just gotta wait a week for another and hope it's better. But when a bad special comes out, great, gotta wait another 4 months to try again. I think they're just ready and eager for things to get back to basics. For the show to remove itself from this legal web it's found itself encased in because, in a lot of ways, it's become more interesting to talk about than the show itself. Mostly because the show has just been missing in action for a year.
Zealand?
No
New
news
Zealand
about when
or
it's returning
Australia?
other than the vague info of sometime in 2025,
Can't
which many
unhear it
believed was a
now.
result of the creators wanting to skip out in the election, but I have to imagine the reality is the show won't be returning until sometime later this year because there'll finally be a definitive answer on what the result of this lawsuit is. At least once the Warner contract runs out, they can go back to releasing episodes without fear of being sued. Either way, I can't believe I've been talking about this lawsuit for 2 years. God kill me.
An accent, yeah, that. Subscribe.